It began with a whisper behind closed doors. But shame has a way of slipping through the cracks like smoke. In a quiet Nigerian village where tradition held sway and secrets festered beneath smiles, a woman named Amaka bore the brunt of her husband's cruelty. One insult too far, spoken in front of his drunken friends, would awaken something ancient and vengeful. A wronged spirit. Buried curse. By the time he realized what he had done, it was too late. This is the tale of pride, shame, and a terrifying retribution. Amaka had always been soft. Her mother used to call it a blessing, saying, "You are made of comfort, child, like the earth itself." But in the eyes of her husband, Obinna, softness became disgust. At first, he masked it behind polite comments, then silence, and eventually mockery. They'd been married for 5 years, living in a modest house at the edge of Unique village. Obinna was once a gentle man, or so Amaka believed, until his business ventures failed. The humiliation gnawed at him, twisted him. And each day he found new ways to release his bitterness, mostly on her. Amaka worked hard, kept the house spotless, and prepared meals from scratch even when her bones ached. But none of it seemed enough. Her husband's frustration had turned into open contempt. He mocked her laughter, criticized her cooking, and worst of all, commented on her body with scornful eyes. Then came the night everything changed. It was Obinna's birthday. He invited his friends over. 5 rowdy men who drank palm wine like water and spoke too loudly about money they didn't really have. Amaka served them with a smile plastered on her face, wearing the blue wrapper he once said brought out her eyes. But as she bent to pour drinks, laughter erupted behind her. Obinna pointed at her, face flushed with drink. "See this one, my wife. Like a fat elephant stomping through the forest." The room burst into laughter. One friend slapped his thigh and wheezed. Another mimicked stomping hooves. Amaka stood still, the calabash in her hand trembling. The laughter didn't stop until she quietly turned and walked away. No words, no tears, just silence. But silence in stories like this is never empty. That night, Amaka didn't sleep in their room. She stayed on the mat in the living room, facing the door, eyes wide open in the darkness. Something in her had shifted. Not broken, shifted. She rose before dawn and went to the forest. Not the one near the farms where children played, but the deep forest beyond the river. The one villagers spoke of in hushed tones. The one known for its whispers and shadows. She walked barefoot, the earth cool beneath her feet, until she reached the twisted Iroko tree at the center. Legend said the tree grew from the spine of a betrayed woman who cursed her killer with her dying breath. Amaka knelt before it. "I am not here to beg," she said to the wind. "I am here to offer." She took a single strand of her hair and buried it in the roots. Then she whispered 3 words in Igbo that her grandmother once taught her, words forbidden, meant only for the ears of ancient spirits. When she returned home, she didn't speak. She cooked breakfast, cleaned, and greeted Obinna with a kiss on the cheek. He blinked, surprised by her calm. That week she was sweeter than ever. Polite, soft-spoken, attentive. Obinna began to gloat, telling his friends how he tamed his wife, calling her his obedient elephant now. They laughed with him again. But none of them noticed how the shadows in the house grew darker at night, or how the air became thick with something unseen. Then the dreams began. At first, Obinna dreamed of being chased. Thick trees. Heavy footsteps behind him. Always behind him. Something large breathing down his neck. Then came the dreams where he couldn't move. He would awaken, paralyzed, only his eyes darting about as a figure stood over him. Massive. Silent. Its face hidden in shadow, but with eyes like coals in ash. He told Amaka, laughing nervously. "Can you imagine? Something was watching me. Standing right there." She just smiled. "Maybe it's the elephant spirit," she said softly. "You called her, didn't you?" Obinna didn't laugh. By the 3rd week things worsened. Flies gathered on his food. The taps ran red for a second before clearing. He swore the walls whispered when he turned his back. Worst of all, his reflection in the mirror seemed to move differently, lagging behind, sometimes smiling when he wasn't. He begged Amaka to come to church with him. She agreed. But as the priest placed his hand on Obinna's head, the man convulsed. "She's coming!" he screamed, voice layered with something deep and inhuman. "You mocked her name. You stomped her pride." The priest staggered back. "This is not ordinary. This is old." They gave Obinna holy water, anointed his doorposts, and told him to fast. But each night he woke up screaming. Once he ran outside naked, clawing at his skin, shouting, "She's in my blood." Amaka watched silently. One evening, Obinna opened their bedroom cupboard and found muddy footprints inside. Giant round prints. He staggered back, heart racing. Amaka stood at the doorway. "She is very patient," she said quietly. "Unlike me." He snapped. "What did you do? What demon have you brought into my house?" Amaka stepped forward. Her voice was calm, almost tender. "You called me an elephant, Obinna. In front of your friends. You laughed while they trampled my spirit. But elephants, they remember." That night, he locked himself in the guest room with a Bible. He didn't sleep. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the floor began to shake. He heard footsteps, massive ones approaching the door. But, then a silence. He waited, breath held, sweat pouring down his face. The door creaked open. No one was there. But on the floor was a trail of wet, muddy footprints leading to his bed. He screamed until his throat bled. The days that followed were not marked by thunderclaps or open hauntings. Instead, it was the quiet unraveling of a man's sanity. Obinna stopped leaving the house. He shuttered the windows, unplugged the TV, and covered every mirror with thick wrappers. Even the smallest reflections, metal pots, water bowls, spoons, he avoided as if his own face would devour him. Amaka moved through the house like a ghost. Her presence became lighter. Not physically. No, she still carried her soft frame with grace, but spiritually, as though she had offloaded something heavy into the forest that day. Her eyes no longer flinched when Obinna yelled, and her hands no longer trembled when he hurled a plate. But these days he didn't yell or throw. He only mumbled, afraid of hearing himself too clearly, lest something else answer back. At night he slept with the lights on. Even then, sleep was never kind. The dreams returned, darker, more vivid. In one, he stood in a village where everyone had elephant heads. They danced around him, chanting in low, guttural voices, stomping the ground until it cracked beneath him. When he looked down, he was the size of an ant. And then came the real nightmares. One evening, Amaka was boiling yam when she heard the shriek. It didn't sound like her husband. It sounded like a man being unskinned. She rushed into the guest room, where Obinna had barricaded himself, but the door had already flung open. Obinna sat in the corner, eyes wide, finger pointing at the center of the bed. "She sat there," he whispered. "She looked like you but bigger. Huge." Her body cracked the frame. Her skin was made of bark. Her eyes were bleeding milk. Amaka said nothing. He grabbed her wrists. "Tell her to stop. Tell her I'm sorry." She leaned in. "You didn't apologize when you laughed with your friends. You didn't apologize when you called me an elephant and spat the word like poison. I didn't mean it." "Yes, you did. That's the problem." Obinna collapsed into sobs. The next morning, they found strange symbols carved into the living room wall. Thick looping spirals that bled tree sap. The carpenter who came to inspect it refused to touch it. "This is not ordinary," he said, crossing himself. "You need a diviner." Amaka agreed. She traveled deep into Okigwe Hills to find Dibia Chikir, a woman with no age in her face and a python that watched her every move. When Amaka entered the shrine, she bowed her head and explained everything. The insult, the offering, the strange events. Chikir nodded slowly. "You did not summon a demon. You awakened a presence. The spirit of the forgotten mother." She dwells in the roots of women humiliated beyond bearing. She hears when they're laughed at while serving food, when their wombs are mocked, when they are called names like fat cow or elephant by those who once vowed love. Amaka's voice broke. But I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted him to feel what I felt. Child, spirits do not stop at the edge of your desire. They move with their own rage. Chikir reached behind her and brought out a bowl of black ash. If you want to silence her, you must go back to the tree. With him. Amaka stared. He won't go. Then you must make him. When she returned home, she found Obinna curled in the kitchen, whispering to a broomstick like it was a person. His eyes were bloodshot and his lips were cracked. The stench of urine hung in the air. I saw her again, he whispered. She dragged me through mud. She showed me her face, but it was a mask. Underneath she was ancient. Angry. Obinna, she said gently. We must go back. To the forest. No, he screamed, shaking his head like a child. She lives there. That's where she was born. If you want to be free, it's the only way. After 3 days of convincing, part begging, part threatening, he agreed. Amaka dressed him in white, tied a red cloth around her own waist, and they walked barefoot into the bush. The villagers watched them go, some whispering prayers, others holding back children from crossing the path they took. As they approached the Irako tree, Obinna began to shiver. The wind grew louder. Or maybe the forest grew quieter. So quiet the wind sounded like a scream. The roots of the tree bulged like veins. Flies swarmed above a mound of old bones at the base. Obinna fell to his knees. I'm sorry, he croaked. I was proud. I was stupid. I mocked your gift. I used her love like a rag. A low groan echoed from the earth. The ground pulsed once, then twice. The wind whispered his name. Obianea. Amaka reached into her wrapper and pulled out the bowl of black ash. She poured it onto the roots and began to chant the words Chikir had taught her. Obinna writhed, his body convulsing. Steam rose from his skin. Then a silence. The wind stopped. The birds returned. Amaka leaned over him. It's done, she said softly. You are free. But something was wrong. Obinna sat up slowly. Too slowly. His movements weren't his. His eyes were no longer red, they were completely white. He turned to Amaka and spoke in a voice that echoed like many voices in one. You think it ends like this? She froze. What are you? She made the offering. Accepted. But I did not come for just him. I came for all of them. All who laughed. All who shamed the sacred form. Obinna's jaw unhinged. He let out a deep, low trumpet. It was not human. Trees shook. Amaka backed away. No. This wasn't part of the deal. There was no deal. Only a door. And you opened it. Obinna's body rose a few inches off the ground. His limbs snapped in unnatural directions, stretching grotesquely. His stomach bulged, then sank. His spine curved until he stood hunched. His silhouette resembling something, not quite human, not quite beast. He took one step toward her, and the ground beneath him rotted into mush. Amaka ran. She ran through thorns and mud, past startled birds and shifting shadows, all the way to the village square. She collapsed at the feet of the elders, screaming. Something followed me. Something ancient. They summoned the oracle, who threw cowries onto the earth and studied their pattern. Her face went pale. You didn't bind the spirit, she said. You only gave it a host. Amaka wept. I only wanted to teach him a lesson, she whispered. But the lesson had outgrown her hands. What was awakened was not a moral story. It was a storm. That night, thunder cracked over Umyanik. A great howl rose from the forest, carrying with it the sound of trampling hooves. One by one, the men who had laughed that night at the birthday party began to scream in their sleep. One ran into the river and drowned himself. Another gouged out his eyes. The third simply vanished, leaving behind muddy footprints leading out the window. In the village, people began to say, "Be careful what you say to your wife. She may not curse you, but the earth might." And as for Obinna, he was last seen walking into the forest on all fours, his back twisted, his mouth covered in vines. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply followed the path to the Iroko tree, swallowed whole by roots older than memory. In the days after Obinna disappeared into the forest, a quiet terror settled over Yumyanik like a blanket soaked in dread. The elders held meetings behind closed doors, the oracle refused visitors, and the women whispered while drawing water, glancing toward the trees as though they might step forward and speak. Children were kept indoors after dusk. The laughter that once floated through the streets died on the lips of the men, as if they had all swallowed stones. And Amaka, she no longer wept. She moved about like a woman reborn, not with joy but with solemn purpose. The spirit had spoken through her husband, and she understood now. This was not punishment. It was remembrance. Vengeance was only the first ripple. Beneath it lay something more ancient and sacred: reclamation. Still, she hadn't meant for the curse to spread. What had begun as a cry for justice had become an uncontrollable wildfire. Even those who hadn't insulted her directly, neighbors, children of the mockers, women who stood by silently, began to suffer. Livestock gave birth to malformed creatures. Dreams were filled with stampeding elephants made of bark and ash. The air carried whispers no one could trace. One evening, Chikir the Dibia arrived at Amaka's door unannounced. She looked older than before, wearier. Her python coiled tightly around her neck like a scarf made of warning. "You summoned her," Chikir said without a greeting. "Now you must lead her back." Amaka shook her head. "I don't know how." "You do. You always did. This isn't about knowing, it's about facing her." "I never wanted this to happen." Chikir's eyes were hard. "But it did. And it won't stop. Not until the balance is restored." Amaka sat in silence for a long time. Outside, a goat screamed as if being torn in half. "What must I do?" she asked finally. "You must enter the grove again where the roots touch blood. Alone. And you must offer what you've been unwilling to." Amaka's voice trembled. "And what is that?" "Your truth." That night, Amaka set out toward the forest again. This time she wore no red. No protection. Only a wrapper tied tightly across her chest, and a calabash in her hand, empty save for a single white stone. Her journey felt like walking into the mouth of a fable. The forest greeted her with silence. No insects buzzed. No frogs croaked. Even the wind seemed to watch her. She reached the Iroko tree just as the moon passed behind a thin veil of cloud, dimming the grove into a blue hush. The roots pulsed faintly like a sleeping heart. Amaka knelt. "I came to you not because I hated him," she said softly, "but because I hated myself for letting him do it, for laughing along, for shrinking smaller each time he spoke, for carrying shame I didn't deserve." A breeze brushed her cheek. A low hum began to build in the soil beneath her knees. "I wore my body like a burden. I believed every insult, every look. Even from the other women. Even from myself." The calabash in her hand grew warm. She took the white stone and placed it at the base of the tree. "I offer you my shame. Take it. Feed on it. Leave the rest." The ground trembled. And then the voice came, not from the tree but from within her. "You carry the weight of many. Their pain, their silence. Will you become the vessel?" Amaka closed her eyes. "I will." The roots coiled around her ankles like vines seeking comfort, not harm. She felt them press gently against her skin, then retreat. A pulse surged through her spine, and for a moment she was everywhere, inside every woman who had ever been mocked for her size, her face, her voice. She felt their rage, their buried roars, their forgotten names. When she opened her eyes, the tree was weeping sap again, but this time it smelled sweet like honey. And standing across from her, just beyond the twisted trunk, was Obinna. Or something that used to be him. His face was no longer white-eyed or broken. He looked like the man she had married, young, strong, full of charm, but quiet now, humble. He stepped forward and knelt before her. "I see you," he whispered. "I finally do." Amaka said nothing. A wind passed between them, lifting his body gently into the air. The bark of the tree split open, revealing a hollow space inside. Obinna smiled sadly. "Tell them what you saw," he said, "so they don't forget." And then he disappeared into the tree. The hollow closed. Amaka returned to the village at dawn. Her wrapper was torn, her feet cut and blistered, but her shoulders were straight, her eyes firm. When the people saw her, they fell silent. She walked to the village square and raised her hands. "No more hiding," she said. "No more silence." And she told them everything. She told them about the spirit of the forgotten mother, about the weight of shaming a woman for the body that bore life, about the power of humiliation, and about how easy it was to awaken something ancient when pain was buried too deep. She didn't name her husband as a villain. She didn't need to. His story was now the village's story. And in time they listened. The elders called a gathering. They built a shrine near the Irako tree, not to worship but to remember. A space where women could come and leave behind their burdens. Scraps of cloth, pages of old journals, even tears. And with each offering, the air in Yumunich became lighter. The village began to change. Men apologized, not out of fear but reflection. They stopped laughing when a woman walked by. They started asking their wives how they truly felt. Not all at once, not perfectly, but the shift began. As for Amaka, she became known not just as the wife who walked with spirits, but as the woman who stood tall when her soul had every reason to crumble. Children would ask, "Is it true that your husband turned into a tree?" She would smile gently. "No, he became something greater. He became a story. And stories, as every elder knows, never die."